volunteer flying is about so much more than just hour building. It's about building a legacy of service and impact. Every flight that you take can help someone else in need, and the skills you gain along the way are going to be invaluable in your own aviation career.
How many people go through life doing work they really don't like, but every day dreaming of, say, working in the aviation industry? They say it's too late. They think it would be too hard. They think it would go against conventional norms. If you never go after what you want, you'll never have it. This is Fly the Transition. Join us as we soar through the captivating stories of individuals embracing a thrilling journey into the aviation industry. From pilots spreading their wings to mechanics fine-tuning the engines and a myriad of industry professionals, each with a unique tale to tell. Get ready to dive into the diverse backgrounds, the pivotal moments that propelled their leap, and the sheer determination that transformed their aspirations into reality. We're not just about dreams. We're about making them take flight. Welcome to Fly the Transition. And now your host, Jim Schilling.
Welcome back, all my aviation friends, to another episode of Fly the Transition. I'm your host, Jim, and today we're exploring the incredible ways that you can combine your passion for flying with meaningful work. That's right, volunteer flying. Well, after my last episode with Stephanie Lamar with the Freedom Aviation Network, I am pumped to look at this topic a little bit more in depth about volunteer flying and the benefits that you can give to your community, as well as maybe building some hours and some networking at the same time. From disaster relief to supporting veterans, volunteering allows pilots to build hours, make a difference, and connect with a network of like-minded aviators, some of which might already be in the position that you wish to hold someday. In this episode, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the organizations that are out there, as well as the benefits and challenges of volunteer flying. We will also talk about some of the incredible work done for hurricane relief in 2024, as well as some precautions you might need to take when considering this type of mission. Volunteer flying is one of the most rewarding ways that you can use your skill as a pilot. It offers a number of benefits, including things like building hours. If you're working towards airline minimums or other professional aviation goals, volunteer missions are fantastic ways to log some really meaningful flight time. It's not just laps in the pattern over and over and over again. It's actually getting out there and making a difference. I know that when I was with Civil Air Patrol, I didn't get a chance to do any mission pilot work, but I did do some observing and some scanning where I was part of an air crew, and I found those missions to be really fun and rewarding working in that crewed environment. Next up, I would talk about networking. I kind of mentioned this at the outset of the episode, but through these organizations, you're going to meet other pilots, other industry professionals. These connections can help you open some doors that might be unexpected. Maybe you make a connection with a pilot who flies for your dream airlines, or maybe one who opens the door to something that you didn't anticipate as being a type of flying that you want to do in the future, such as some of the 135 operations that exist. There's a lot of different options here. And the other thing I'll note here is, though you're creating networking opportunities, these aren't like transactional things where like this is you're specifically meeting with this one person, kind of a what's in it for me moment. You're involved in an organization, you're working side by side with these people, and they're going to get to know what you're about. And that can be a good thing as far as not just helping to steer you in the right direction, but they could offer you a lot of mentoring and maybe sponsorship through the process itself. If you work hard and you build those good relationships, some of those people can turn into great references for you. The other thing that I think could be the biggest benefit here is making a difference. You're not just doing this for yourself. You're not just out plowing through the sky to build hours. You're a pilot out there who's going to bring hope, resources, and other support to people who might be in some pretty dire circumstances. Whether you're transporting the survivor of human trafficking, a medical patient, or reuniting a service dog with its veteran owner, or carrying supplies after a hurricane, these flights all have a tangible impact. So these volunteer flights aren't just about building hours. Yes, that's a result that will happen, but it's really more about the people and the communities that you're going to serve. So organizations like Angel Flight, Pilots and Paws, and others are going to make it pretty easy to match your skills with where real needs lie. So now is a moment where we can take a little bit of a bigger look at some of these bigger organizations that are out there. this is by far not an all-inclusive list of the different types of groups that are out there that do volunteer flying. And your mileage may vary depending on which organization you get to or different chapters. So this is just a overview, not necessarily a deep dive for specific organizations. So if any of these are intriguing to you, I really encourage you to take a moment, do your homework, and figure out which is really going to be a good fit. So with that in mind, let's start off with the folks from our last episode with Freedom Aviation Network. So you heard our last episode and you're like, that kind of flying is what I want to do. You're helping survivors in really bad situations leave, do shelter relocation, maybe make court appointments or other reintegrations. And that's a place where you want to take your aviation skills and really help people out. So here's what you would need to do as far as getting involved with that organization. The minimum requirements here are private pilot and 250 hours minimum. You're also going to need to have access to your own aircraft, and they're going to have some online forms that you can fill out as well as some follow-up after that. From there, you'll work with their team to figure out if you're a fit as well as what would be the next steps. The other thing you can do is if you're not necessarily looking to fly, but you want to get involved in the organization, there is always other opportunities available as well. Things like being a pilot coordinator, helping with logistics and operations, pilot relations and recruiting, or social media or marketing. So there are still a lot of opportunities outside of just the flying. So maybe you're one of those pilots who you're still working through your very early parts of your ratings and you're not 250 hours yet. There's still a way for you to get involved in these organizations, and maybe down the road that can turn into more flying assignments once you do hit those hours. Another one I think that we see a lot of is pilots and Paws. This is one I see come up on my own social media feeds quite a bit. And these are people who are going out and relocating animals from overcrowded shelters all over the country to new homes or to no-kill facilities. And it's just all about the love of animals and getting them to a safe place. So for pilots and Paws, you don't need a commercial pilot certificate or anything like that. And from the research I've been able to do, there's not like a set hour requirement that you have to meet. That's going to be up to you as PIC as for your level of comfort. Now, obviously, you do have to have your private pilot certificate so that you can act as the PIC, but you'll also need access to an aircraft, just like with other organizations, to be able to fly these missions. Some have also said that once you get your instrument rating, it's going to open the door a little bit more for you for what types of flights you can take, which in turn is probably going to give you longer flights, more hours, more cross-country hours. So something to consider there as well. Next up, let's talk Angel Flights. I know that in my region, there's Angel Flight Central. Those folks transport patients who are in need of specialized medical care that they can't necessarily access locally. For this, again, you'll need access to an aircraft, but for this organization, it might vary a bit by chapter, but most of the ones I've seen with Angel Flight are 250 hours of PIC time, 50 of which should have been within the last 12 months prior to your application. So they don't want you to just have a bunch of hours and have been sitting for a few years. You need to be somewhat current in your flying. Again, as I've looked at different chapters, the numbers on how many hours you had to have within the last however many months, it looks like it varies a little bit from what I can see. But again, do your homework and look for a specific chapter to figure out what those needs are in your area. All right, coming up next is Veteran Airlift Command. This is an organization that provides free flights to wounded veterans and their families so that they can go to medical appointments and attend to other compassion needs. The big impact here is it helps veterans get to specialized care that, again, they may not be able to get in their local area, as well as reconnecting them with their families. So for the requirements you're looking at for Veterans Airlift Command for pilots is you need to have a valid pilot certificate with an instrument rating. This is something we haven't seen on the other ones before as a requirement. Your ratings need to be appropriate for the aircraft that you plan on flying, and you have to have a clean flying record. So that means your pilot certificate should have not been suspended or revoked, and the FAA shouldn't have taken any enforcement action against you to qualify. As for the aircraft requirements, they do spell this out a little bit more, which I hadn't seen with a couple of the other organizations, that oftentimes their missions exceed 250 miles from point to point. So they're normally looking for multi-engine or high-performance single-engine aircraft that are certificated for instrument flight and have all the normal airworthiness certificates, all that stuff accompanying that aircraft. And the last one we have here is Aerobridge. So this is an organization that delivers emergency supplies to disaster-stricken areas, and they focus a lot on areas that are inaccessible for a variety of reasons. So we would have seen a lot of this in 2024 with the hurricanes that struck the southeastern part of the country, and Aerobridge, among others, would have been a part of that. You're going to hear some similarities here as well as far as some of the requirements of having access to a suitable aircraft, and you have to meet other FAA guidelines, but it doesn't specifically spell out an hour minimum. So again, that's something where if you're interested in this type of organization, do your homework, hit them up and see what their requirements might be if it's not specifically listed. The one thing in common with all of these organizations is that they operate with strict safety and legal framework, and this is to ensure the integrity of their mission and the safety of all those who are involved. So now this type of flying does come with a cost. Fuel, maintenance, aircraft rental, if that's what you're doing, that's usually all covered by the pilot. However, these organizations are often tax deductible, provided that the organization is a 501c3 nonprofit and you're not receiving any compensation yourself. But make sure to keep really detailed records of your flights and your expenses for any tax filings. So to hit home on some of the tax-deductible aspects of charitable flying, here's a couple of key points to think about. What type of expenses are even deductible? Essentially, pilots volunteering for charitable flights may be eligible to deduct expenses such as fuel, oil, airport fees, or other operational costs directly tied to that flight. However, the cost of any depreciation or the plane's value is not deductible here. You're going to need to keep some documentation to back this stuff up. So you want to keep detailed receipts for any expenses that you'll be claiming. You're going to want to maintain flight logs showing the purpose and duration for your charitable activities. And finally, you're going to want to have some sort of confirmation. So obtain a letter from your charitable organization confirming the nature of the volunteer work and verifying that it meets the IRS requirements. And here comes my standard disclaimer time. You need to consult with a tax professional on this as well. These are just some tips. I am nowhere near an expert or your taxman, so it is essential to consult with a tax professional to ensure that your deductions align with current tax laws and regulations. Tax rules can vary, and there's a lot of nuances here, specific to aviation-related volunteer work. So make sure that you're talking with your tax professional so you don't end up in some kind of bind. There's one other key distinction here that we have to talk about. Volunteer flying is not commercial flying. You should not be accepting compensation for these types of flights whatsoever. Tax deduction is a totally different thing. So the FAA does strictly prohibit receiving compensation for these flights, which is why it's considered charitable or personal flying under FAR 61.113. So take a look at that. Make sure you understand what all of that stuff means and what you can and can't do in that space. This distinction here is going to keep you on the right side of the regulations and still allow you to make an impact with the community and the organization of your choosing. So while volunteer flying is not free, it's not exactly cost prohibitive either, such as paying for your fuel and maintenance up front. But again, you might be able to deduct those later. So consult with your tax professional on that. Insurance, you're obviously going to need to have your aircraft insured. The organization themselves is going to help to coordinate and organize these things, but you're still liable for having the proper insurance for what you're trying to do. So some missions might require additional coverage, but that's not something that the charitable organization is going to give you. You should already have that on your own. So in our last episode, we talked about how Freedom Aviation Network has had 200 plus flights in the 2 years that they have been formally Freedom Aviation Network. But what are some of these other organizations doing out in the volunteer space? I think the one that comes most to mind to everyone in the last year is all the hurricane relief efforts that occurred down in the southeast part of our country. Volunteer aviation played a really key role in hurricane relief. Organizations like Aerobridge and Operation Airdrop delivered a lot of critical supplies to communities that were completely cut off by these storms and flooding. Essentially, this extensive flooding caused road closures and making aviation really the only viable option for many for weeks. So now the next thing I might say might seem controversial to some, but there really were some crucial takeaways for pilots involved. Relief flying must be done within the bounds of established organizations. Attempting independent missions can cause logistical issues for those organizations who are there, safety risks, as well as some legal complications. So in this space, it's immensely important to prioritize safety and professionalism here. There were unfortunately a lot of instances where people were turned away during the storm relief, and there were a lot of well-meaning pilots who inadvertently caused delays and safety concerns by doing their own freelancing during hurricane relief missions. These situations can kind of underscore the importance of coordinating with established organizations. I think one of the big issues we had here is there's so many people who try to have the right intentions and wanted to help and heard the stories of the trials and tribulations people were going through, and they just saturated that area, which ultimately at the end of the day overwhelmed these small airports that weren't prepared for it. It overwhelmed the first responder community, FEMA, as well as the controllers working in those airspaces who really got to work out in sectors and areas where they normally aren't seeing that volume of traffic. So as I said, this might be an unpopular opinion because I know that there's some who think that those pilots were just going in there and trying to do the right thing. But in doing so outside of the bounds of these established organizations, it ultimately caused a few more headaches than they originally intended. As mentioned earlier, the goal of safety, professionalism, and efficiency are going to be really important to try to make sure that efforts and resources get where they need to go in the most efficient manner possible. On the flip side of that, even with all the other people who are going in and trying to freelance to get these missions done, there were a lot of organizations who still did some really incredible work during hurricane relief that really helped people out that were pretty dire straits. So to those pilots who did partake in these types of missions, thank you for your efforts in making sure that we as the aviation community are giving back to others in their time of need. So as we wrap up, just a couple final thoughts. Volunteer flying is about so much more than just our building. It's about building a legacy of service and impact. Every flight that you take can help someone else in need. And the skills you gain along the way are going to be invaluable in your own aviation career. So it's really a win-win situation here. If you are ready to take that next step, check out some of the organizations we've talked about today, or do your research to see if there's another organization out there that better fits your needs and your passions for giving back in your community. I will include a number of links and resources down in the show notes so you can learn a bit more about some of the organizations we talked about. But as I mentioned, this is by far not an all-inclusive list. So if you think I missed something, be sure to do your research and see if that's an option for you. I hope that you've been inspired to find your way into some volunteer work soon with your aviation dreams and goals, and I hope that you found this episode helpful. If you did, please share it with fellow pilots or aspiring aviators, and don't forget to subscribe to Fly the Transition for more tips, stories, and insight. Thanks once again for joining me on this episode of Fly the Transition, and until next time, keep your eyes on the skies and your dreams soaring high.
You've been listening to Fly the Transition. Life is too short for you not to do what you love. And our passion is to give you all the tools you need to make the transition from doing what you do to being in the aviation industry. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can reach out by email at flythetransition@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook at Fly the Transition. And the website for Flying Midwest Media is flyingmidwest.com. Keep soaring. See you next time on Fly the Transition.